C5 Insight is a Microsoft partner that plans, builds, and supports solutions in Dynamics 365, Teams, SharePoint, and the Power Platform. Contact us to modernize your business today.
Okay, good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever corner of our world you're logging in from today. It's time for one of our Thursday webinars, and today we're going to cover the topic, 7 habits of modern collaboration success, or in many people's cases, recovery with Microsoft 365. So we're going to be diving into a lot of what you might experience with SharePoint, Teams, and the broader Microsoft 365 platform, where it's this amazing toolbox, but sometimes it becomes a little bit of a mess if it's not implemented well. And in fact, before I even dive into the topic, I wanted to talk a little bit about why this topic is actually so important, why it continues to come up for us again and again and again. So let me put it in a little bit of a story format. Every one of us in our workplaces has a story that feels kind of like this, right? We're part of an organization. It started at some point, and this horrible thing happened to it. It was successful, and so it grew. And as it grew, it got more and more complicated, right? You went from a small team to a larger team to many teams of people possibly working disparately in different locations around the globe. And you had leadership versus employees, and you're all trying to connect with customers. Then you have all the systems that aid you with those connections and communication and transactions and all the different communication channels that are available digitally, both internally and externally these days, and generally partners who help you in that journey. The list goes on and on. So as our businesses become increasingly complex, it starts to feel like this picture, right? It starts to feel like you have to take a long time, months, if not sometimes years, to gain the tribal knowledge required just to get your job done, right? Just to process a return, just to create a proposal, just to do the things you need to do to serve the customers that your organization exists to serve. And so what do businesses do to try to help solve this problem? They go and buy technology, right? And so you might be there with this, right? Oh, wow, look, here's Microsoft 365. It can be a central point hub of documents and communication and records management and chats all in one place, so we can simplify things a little bit. And maybe you do some other things with that too, like add Viva to it, or Dynamics, maybe a CRM type of application for centralizing customer communications too. Or in today's modern world, we then start layering AI on top of all this too, saying, well, AI can help simplify it. Well, when it all comes right down to that, ultimately, that doesn't actually make anything any easier. In fact, it makes it more complicated. This was driven home to us many years ago. We were working with a client who said, essentially, we love our business, we love our leadership team, and we felt like every day we kind of strap on this big, heavy pack full of applications, full of rocks we had to march up the hill with to get our job done. And one day a leader came in after seeing a great demo and had a rock that said SharePoint on it and threw it in our backpack and said, that should help. And we thought, it's just another rock. It's just slowing me down. It's not making things any better. In fact, it's making things worse, right? It's another place I have to go to find stuff or create stuff or key stuff in to get work done. And now people are saying, here's a new rock, AI, maybe that will work. Well, the problem is AI doesn't work well if it's not working on top of a well-structured environment. And that's the key problem that all of these things face. What's the structure? And the good news is it doesn't have to be that way, right? If we use these systems right, we can grow increasingly away from that last page and more onto what you see on this graphic right now, with all those applications becoming a hub, becoming a center point of well-integrated communication and collaboration across our organizations, and AI layering on top of that to make those investments you've made pay off even more because the information is well structured. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Quick introduction to me. My name is Jeff Abels. I run a company called C5 Insight that I've run for a little over 20 years. I'm a Microsoft MVP, which basically means I do a lot of things like this. I try to understand their technology well, and I try to help people in the community get the most out of it by bringing topics like this to you. My organization called C5 Insight, we are a Microsoft partner. So we engage with organizations around the world, helping them get the most out of Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Teams, Microsoft Lists, Purview, those things, as well as Dynamics 365, the customer-facing collaboration tool suite from Microsoft. And I geek out on it. I spend too much hours working on it. I've written some books and helped write some other books on it. But the important stuff is over on the right-hand side of the slide. There's my little tribe that keeps me going, and is my why, my wife, our 2 daughters, our 2 grandchildren, our sons-in-law, and our little pup Verdi, who keeps our empty nest a little bit warmer. Okay, so enough about that. Let's dive into the content together here. So the title was 7 Habits, and we're going to talk about 7 habits. We only have an hour. It's going to be very, very fast paced, and I'm going to scratch the surface of each one of these 7 topics. So what I've done to try to help you dig deeper is on many of the slides, you're going to see a little orange flyout, like that one that says downloadable resources. What those are links. Many of them are links to videos. Some of them are links to other resources, blogs, downloadable tools, and that kind of stuff. So if you want to dive deeper, just hit me up via email anytime. If you're watching this recorded, that's fine. Hit me up via email. I get you a PDF copy of these slides. The links in the PDF will be hot, and you can go follow those links to dive into these 7 topics even deeper. Because again, I gotta go really quick today to get through all of our content. Okay, let's start with number 1: initial roadmap and annual planning. So planning is incredibly important, but what we run into is planning for a modern collaboration project is a lot different from typical project planning these days. So we run into very few clients who say, we didn't do any planning, we just turned it on and started using it. That does happen, and that's its own problem. But oftentimes people do a plan, but it's not a plan that's really a roadmap. It's not a visionary plan. It's just a short project plan to get things done. So let's talk a little bit about what the difference between those things are. This research from Harvard Business Review, I love. I've been quoting it for a couple of years now. It still holds true. But the finding from Harvard Business Review was most organizations, over 80% of organizations, are actually weak in digital management or digital leadership or both. Now, that finding did not mean they don't have digital tools. It means their leaders and managers are not digitally enabled. They don't look at their digital tools as a way to be better leaders and better managers. Instead, they say, well, I wrote the check, I signed the check, I agreed on the project, but you know what? I'm a manager, I'm a leader. Those tools are for somebody else. My job is to be more people first, right? So I'm not going to be a digital person. I have people who should be digital. Harvard Business Review tells us nothing could be further from the truth. The 81% that are successful with that have a revenue growth rate of 10% greater than those others that do not. I'm sorry, the 19% that are strong at that have a 10% better growth rate. So how did they achieve that? Well, according to Harvard Business Review, they did 2 things. They have a digital coach that partners with them to create a clear digital vision that results in that revenue growth. So that's what we mean when we say roadmap. It's you want a digital vision. It's not a project plan. Those are important too, but it's more a vision of exactly what does success look like. When we wake up a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years from now, and we say our digital project, our modern workplace Microsoft 365 project has been a raving success. Why are we going to say that? What are the measurable outcomes that we're going after? That's vision, right? From the vision, you build your project plans. And over our lifetime, we've kind of found a 4-step process for building these kinds of roadmaps that can be very, very successful. We work across both Dynamics 365, as I said, and Microsoft 365. And this part of what we do is very similar for both types of projects. These roadmaps start with collaborating. They start with getting the team together and listening to them, right? Who are the stakeholders that matter? That always includes your leaders, but that also includes subject matter experts, frontline people, a sample of people from across your organization. Starting to run workshops with them, do electronic surveys, gather information to understand the gap between your present situation and the perfect future you envision for yourself. Then you do the analysis of it, right? Then you take all of that raw material, you analyze it, and you start to say, here are the decisions we need to make, right? Here's what our understanding of what the team is telling us and our understanding of what modern environments make available to us that we might not even know we can ask for yet. Then you put the document together, you create the plan, but you're not done yet because you need to validate it. The best laid plan is somewhere between 60% and 85% correct. You need to have a process in place to say, how do I go back to the team, evaluate it up front, and continue to evaluate it on an agile basis in the future. Now, if you ever heard me talk about anything before, that sounds familiar because it really means listening to your team, taking the time to understand all that information, analyze it, connecting, creating your process, creating your plan, and then knowing what the results are, right? Constantly evaluating and reevaluating it so you can do it better and better. One thing we found is super helpful with this, when you're doing the planning, include what we call an art of the possible demo, or you can call it a visionary demo if you want to. Because in today's world, the technology has changed so fast that a lot of people don't even know what to ask for. So if you sit down in a workshop and say, hey, what do you want SharePoint to do for you? Or what do you want to do in our digital workplace or something like that? You might want to start with a blank question like that without biasing them too much, but you pretty quickly want to get into, let me show you a view of what's possible right now. And all of a sudden, people's imagination is opened up. You start to create a dialogue that results in a lot of really, really good ideas coming out. There's a link there where you can go download some really quick demo videos on why use SharePoint. I'll actually be doing a half-day session on that next week with another organization called Advanced Learning Institute. And I can tell you, by the way, this stuff moves so fast. Literally, I was on a call with Microsoft 2 days ago where they said, essentially, hey, we want you guys as a partner to engage with us to help us with getting Copilot out there with this new licensing model. They mentioned the licensing model. That's not an important detail yet, but it was new to us, right? We're a mile deep in this stuff all the time, and we had an internal discussion about it afterwards. We had to go do some more research to dive into it because Microsoft had rolled out some new licensing things just a couple of weeks ago that changed a lot for us, right? So it's really important to stay on top of this and continuously give your team a vision for the future, because that vision for the future is always changing. And then you want great planning workshops, right? You want to bring the team together, usually in multiple different workshops, to say, what is your vision of the future and how are we going to prioritize that vision? Now, there's a lot of different ways you can facilitate these. We use a process we developed called luck storming to do it. This is one of the top questions we lead with almost everyone. May not always be the first question, but it's usually one of the questions we do with most of the teams. And that is basically just to say, let's not bias you. Let's just say we're in this room together 2 years from now. Help us understand what a successful picture of the future looks like. Now, there's a lot of nuance with that. There's a lot of discussion to make sure you don't just walk away with things like, oh, it's easy to search, it's easy to use, it's user friendly, I can find what I'm looking for, right? We know what those things are. You need more concrete use cases, more concrete stories of exactly what are we going to be doing and how is it different from today. So there's ways you can engage your audience to make sure you're taking things away that aren't just kind of too visionary, right? They're too loose. You need some nice tight things you can walk away with to say, here's a crisp definition of our outcomes, and they're measurable. We'll know what they look like when we get to them. Now, your roadmap deliverables look something like this. Remember, I kind of said, listen and understand, there's a lot of raw material there, right? So you want to capture that raw material. That's not necessarily what everyone wants to read, but if you're going to do some analysis, you need a place to put all that raw material so you can go back and digest it. So on the right-hand side of this, you can see an example of the raw material we typically produce when we create a roadmap. And then you have your final documents that you're bringing back to your team. And in general, you want two things. You want the executive summary for those leaders in your organization who don't have the time to have a long attention span, but you need to engage them and you need their buy-in on certain things. That's usually a PowerPoint deck. And then you have your much more voluminous, detailed, not requirements, because this is a roadmap, it's not a project plan, but you have your milestones, you have your broad project flow charts and those kinds of things. You've got your integration diagrams for your vision of the future. You've got your documented KPIs you want to be able to start pulling in the future. That's your more granular document that's going to be the tool you use to then build your project plans and ultimately go back to your users to gather requirements from as time goes by. So that's what a roadmap is. Now, ideally, with your roadmap, when you begin converting that into project plans, we're talking about Microsoft 365. One of the big struggles with Microsoft 365 is creating change, changing behavior, getting people to adopt the solution. If you're helping to run the project, please consider using the amazing tool set Microsoft makes available to you to run the project. Communicate in teams, share documents in SharePoint. Consider using Planner or Project for the Web or some hybrid solution that brings all the best of those things together to do the project management. And there's a video here that talks about some of the different project management options. So if you're not quite sure what those are, how to get started, you can go reference that video to be doing a little thinking about your project planning. All right. Number two is this idea of information architecture. That seems like a really big, intimidating couple of words, but Simply put, it just means there's a place for everything and everything gets put into its place, right? So that's the problem with Microsoft 365 is oftentimes you've graduated to that from older environments like a file share and maybe Skype or something like that. And what often happens is you go into it thinking that file share has become a mess, right? Everyone can relate to how much of a mess a file share becomes over time. And so you think we're going to go into this new cloud environment and we'll be able to solve that problem. What I can tell you from having to help better than half of our clients through a recovery process is SharePoint and Microsoft 365 can take a messy file share and make it way messier than you ever thought was possible. Or it can actually make it a much cleaner, easier user experience. But that does not happen automatically or accidentally. It's not that it's configured out of the box, and when you turn it on, your files will be stored better because there's something behind the scenes that makes that happen. If you architect it well, if you create a place for everything and you govern it well, if you help people understand where that place is, you're going to have a better outcome. So a couple of things we always like to do when it comes to Microsoft 365 is, first of all, we want to understand the current landscape and how, remember our opening image, this can become a hub for everything. So how does all this relate, right? Where is your ERP information stored? Do you have point of sale information in your environment at all? Do you have data sitting out on a website somewhere? Do you have information in some other document store? Are you sharing information with clients somehow? Where is your CRM data stored? So this is one actual diagram that came out of this where we said, okay, how do we begin to create some informational hubs? Some of those already exist. There's already some integration in place. Awesome. Some of that stuff does not exist, and we need to talk about integrating it in the future. And some things you might even say we won't need anymore. Once we fully and properly leverage Microsoft 365, we're going to migrate some of that data and applications into this suite, and we're going to sunset that old application. Along those lines, also, we always try to think of how are you going to architect the workspaces themselves, right? So this is one element that's very different from something like a highly structured environment like you would have in a CRM solution. SharePoint is a content environment, right? It's optimized for managing data that's more abstract, right? It's documents. There's all sorts of different things out there, and you've got to be very flexible in how you pull it together. One of the words we've started to use as a company, instead of saying sites or teams or communities or something like that, we say workspaces, because a workspace can be any one of those things. And if you do it well, you have people that help you decide, hey, I need a workspace to do this. Oh, that's really a community. That's kind of a social engagement. We're going to create something in Viva Engage to do that. I need this kind of workspace. Well, that's really secure. We're going to create that in Teams for you, and the security on SharePoint will help to make sure that remains secure. I need this kind. Oh, well, that's a site, because that's really kind of part of our intranet, and almost everyone in the organization will have access to it. And it's not quite as dynamic. It doesn't have the same security needs as a secure site. So this is one example workspace architecture where you can see for this particular organization, they had 4 kind of home pages, if you will, 4 hubs that people could come through at various different levels of security. And then below that, there's sub workspaces underneath those things kind of rolled up. And you can even see some of those sub workspaces kind of had different elements within them that might have crossed boundaries a little bit. That's okay. But you need to have that so you start to get this idea of here's the place for everything, right? I'm creating this kind of content, and I know based on this workspace diagram where I need to put that. I know where I need to go to find that information. The other architecture you really want to understand is your licensing architecture. So one of the things we find with Microsoft 365 is it brings so many different applications and capabilities to organizations that oftentimes they realize we're already doing some of that somewhere else. So understanding the licensing architecture, what do we already got that we're already using? What do we have with Microsoft 365? And where do we have multiple places that people can get things done? And let's start unifying on a small number of applications and clear definitions on, I use this to do this kind of work, I use that to do that kind of work, and which ones are we going to sunset and not use? You might decide you've got something that's more important than a Microsoft product to use. You might say, we're using something like Atlassian because our clients force us to use that to get certain things done. So we can't just walk away from that and switch to using Teams and OneNote to do all of that stuff. Okay, fair enough. Then in that case, we know how that fits into the architecture to make that work. I'd mentioned this a little bit in the road mapping section, but I wanted to come back to this again. Really, really important, because when it comes to Microsoft 365, one of the things we see happen really often with it is nobody in the business is really all that heavily engaged, or the right people in the business don't have ownership and engagement, right? It can be an IT project run by IT only, or maybe their internal comms department has done a little bit with it, but then they get frustrated because no one's really adopted it, and it's not a very good internal comms platform if nobody's out there listening to the comms that are happening on it, right? So you need an approach that says, how are we going to get everyone engaged throughout this life cycle? And when you think about engaging everyone in your organization, I like this little 3x2 grid that we've put together for this. And that is, your project life cycle has gazillions of phases for sure, but if you get real simple, there's the annual planning phase. We already talked about that. Roadmap, you want to come back and do that every year, kind of the big strategic planning. And then you've got the production phase. We're doing implementation work. We're changing things. We're updating things. So if you think about that, and then you think about your three personas you typically want to engage with in most organizations today, that's the executive persona, the corporate worker, right? The office worker. And then I'll call the last one the deskless worker, right? That might be the point of sale person, or the manufacturing floor person, or the physician or nurse person, or the field sales person, or whatever it is, but they're the deskless type of worker that's not in the corporate offices. So that gives you a little grid of 2x3. And then within that, the blue boxes are just some different tools you can use. This is a subset of the tools we use to help engage folks. I can't talk about every one of them right now, but I've talked a little bit about some in the planning phase. So let me just hit a couple of them. The first one is this idea of connecting. So in this case, it's this idea of saying, how can we actually bring everybody together around something? So you have a great tool if you've got Microsoft 365. It's called Viva Engage. It used to be called Yammer, but it's an awesome social platform. Here's the way one client actually used that to get everybody engaged across their organization. This is actually a winemaker that we worked with for many years. And essentially they said, we're going to use Viva Engage. And what we want to do is we want to use it to help connect more of our people to the deskless workers. For them, it's the point of sale, right? So Silver Oak has tasting rooms all over the West Coast. And they're like, yes, the winemakers are an incredibly important part of our business too, as are the executives and corporate people. But the people working at the tasting rooms, they are making experiences happen, right? They're the ones in touch with their customers every day. So they said, let's put together a Viva Engage plan that helps us see them, helps everyone in the organization see and recognize them and give them the recognition that they deserve. So they put something together in Viva Engage. They created a little, even a support group for it, saying, okay, we're going to have some champions of it, and then we're going to have everyone else. And the idea is we want people to be sharing stories about those deskless workers, from deskless workers, by deskless workers, and their managers. But we want everyone in the organization to be able to begin to take that in. So they put that together. They put together the training material for it. A little getting started video is one little example we put together for them there for them to work with. And it created a connection that never existed before, because physical connections with that disparate geographic distribution was almost impossible. Now they have these daily interactions that are helping people to say, I am seen, I am noticed, I have a voice, and I'm important with what I'm doing with our organization. We see that kind of connection play out again and again in lots of different organizations. Another way to listen to everybody is through good old surveys. You can do electronic surveys easily. In fact, Microsoft has some great electronic surveying tools built right into it, depending on what you want to do. What I would suggest you do is look at behavior mining types of surveys, because the questions that come out of this are things that actually help you predict change better than anything else we've ever seen. This goes back to research done all the way starting in the 70s by IBM and a bunch of other giant companies over millions of data points that eventually sussed out there are some very interesting and unexpected questions that help you predict the obstacles and strengths that different groups have around change management. And it's super powerful. We've actually put ours into our own little app called Adair.app. You can go to that site and see it. And you can kind of see some of the odd questions that you can ask that help draw results. If you go look at that site, those questions are yours to take a look at. There's no black box or anything like that. We just have some cool machine learning behind the scenes that translates that and helps make recommendations in real time. But one way or another, that is a great way to engage your entire audience and listening to them. What we think is important is not only the behavior mining, but also understanding the gap between what people are telling you is important and what they're telling you they're satisfied with. Where we see a lot of our clients fall down as they go, we're responding to our internal users what they're least satisfied with, which is great, but they might not think that that's important, right? If they think something is a 5 out of 5 importance and they're giving it a 3 out of 5 satisfaction, you probably want to focus on that rather than something they're giving a 1 out of 5 satisfaction, but it's also a 1 out of 5 importance, right? So a gap analysis is an important part of that behavior mining as well.
Struggling to leverage Microsoft Enterprise solutions? At C5 Insight, we understand the intersection between technology, business, and people. Contact us to learn more.
Another big word that's not necessarily a very popular word is this idea of governance. I love this picture when I talk about governance. This is actually a place called Shibuya Crossing, Japan. I hope I've got the pronunciation right. I've never been there myself, but it's one of the busiest pedestrian intersections in the world. Over 250,000 human beings traverse this intersection every day. And there's distracting lights all over the place. There's vehicles whizzing by, and yet they do it safely, securely, and with knowing how the rules work day in and day out. This is a picture of your digital workplace, right? But if it were your real digital workplace, somebody would have put a meeting room right in the middle of the intersection, and helicopters would be landing on top of people and all sorts of other things, right? These folks know the rules and know how to work the rules because there's excellent governance in place. So governance is the rules, but it's also the learning and the training and the institutional knowledge and the tribal knowledge around making that governance understood so you have a safe, secure, predictable, easy to navigate digital workplace. And most digital workplaces are badly broken. People have no idea how to navigate, or if they do, it's because they've spent years digging into it to understand all the peculiarities and nuances of your specific workplace. So offering you a couple of things here. First of all, there's a very basic approach you can take this. If you're a small organization just starting for the very first time, we've got a little PowerPoint template. We've taken a smaller subsegment of it and made that publicly available to you. But even just looking at the slide, here are 6 subject areas that are worthwhile exploring as you think about what does your governance look like, right? And you can kind of see there's sort of the settings part of governance. Hey, how can we go kind of click all the right things to make the rules work automatically the way we want them to? There's security roles and permissions. What kind of roles are we going to put people into depending on what kind of workspaces they're in? There's the management or processes and procedures of governance as well, right? So looking at all that, those are things you need to think about. If you want a few slides to help you dive deeper, you can download that free thing that we've got available on our website. Every organization that's using Microsoft 365 should also have a way of actively monitoring what is going on with Power Automate. Power Automate is basically the workflow engine behind automating certain tasks, right? So I can click a button and it sends something to my coworker for approval. They can approve that in email, and that approval gets noted next to the document as one small example. So what happens with Power Automate is Microsoft built it to kind of be a, air quotes, citizen developer tool to say, hey, we want more and more people to kind of do light process automation on their own, which is great. You need a whole center of excellence approach to help make sure you've got governance around that. But you also want to make sure you're monitoring all those Power Automates, because what happens when person ABC leaves the company? That person was the assistant to someone and wrote what is a mission critical workflow for that important person to get their job done. You deactivate that user. All of a sudden that workflow is not, that Power Automate flow is not running at all anymore. And nobody even knows about it, right? Until 2 months go by and people realize nothing's getting approved anymore. What's happening? You want to be able to monitor all of those in one place. And Microsoft has some light automation tools built into Power Automate. We actually built one ourselves. We actually use Power BI to help pull all the Power Automates across all environments for a client into one place, so you can go look at those in real time and say, are any failing? Are any at risk? What's going on? Give me alerts when that's happening. Let me dig in and understand what the error codes are so I can get those fixed if something's happening with them. So that's a really important part of making sure that you're taking advantage of these great tools from Microsoft. But as your company sits on the foundation of those more and more, you got to have someone who understands what's going on in the plumbing, right? What's going on under the kitchen of all those pipes to make sure that there's not rot happening that's gradually tearing away the foundation of your organization. Now, you want to go a little bit more advanced. I talked about governance at the beginning of this. you probably should consider a governance portal for monitoring all those standard operating procedures around what are you doing in your digital workplace, right? Guess what? SharePoint is a great place to build a portal. We actually have a governance portal we've developed. Anyone can develop their own portal. You can create a site and put your own standard operating policies and procedures in there if you want to. In fact, I did a session a week or two ago on building an SOP site. When I talked about this at a generic level, we've actually created one that's just for SharePoint governance. It's fine-tuned for all the things you need to track about Microsoft 365 so your people can be aware of those. Those are easily accessible, and you can monitor them so they stay modernized, right? Because everything is changing all the time. Number 5, this is a big topic, and there's so many labels we could put on this. The label most people put on this today is adoption. Other people put the label change management on it. I put this in here because I think this is the how you get this done. I've run into a lot of clients we work with who are like, why won't people adopt? We need adoption. We need adoption. To me, in our experience, adoption is the KPI. Adoption is not the goal, right? So what I mean by that is if people are not adopting, it does not necessarily mean that they should be adopting. Maybe they're not adopting because their job actually is more inefficient if they adopt this the way you want them to, right? So it's a KPI. Adoption is a metric you want to listen to say, are people adopting or not? And if they're not, let's ask why, and then let's address it. And addressing it often means better communication, learning and development, or some of the other things we talked about, right? Go back and fix the architecture to make sure it works correctly. So that's why I give it the name I give it here. And what a lot of people miss with this is not easy, right? When a lot of organizations implement Microsoft 365, they think, okay, it's a new thing, right? It's one new thing we want people to learn. But nothing could be further from the truth, right? It's like, oh, we're not going to use email as much anymore. We're going to use posts and Teams now. Well, when and how, and what's the difference between a chat and a post and email, and when do I use which one? Oh, and by the way, we've turned Viva Engage on. Okay, well, that has a kind of a thread, but Teams has kind of threads in it too, and Outlook can have threads. When do I put what in which thread, and when do I do what with this? So if you start thinking about all the things that this can mean to you, it can be really, really overwhelming to someone who's worked with the organization for a long time. So 2 things to think about with this. The old thought process that, hey, 3 or 4 weeks and a new habit is formed, nothing could be further from the truth. The average human being takes at least 2 months to graft in a new habit, right? So saying, we'll do a month on this and a month on this and a month on this, you're going to lose the vast majority of your people if you move that quickly. You need to slow down a little bit, and you need to be prepared to support the stragglers, right? The ones who are taking the better part of a year to change some of their behaviors. You also need to respect the fact that doing too many things at once accomplishes nothing at all. So 2 or 3 things for 2 or 3 months, move on. 2 or 3 things for 2 or 3 months, move on, right? You need a cadence like that. So you need to break it down into digestible chunks. So as people who are watching a session like this, you probably have a very different experience of how fast you can adopt technology versus the people you support. So what I would say is, no matter how slow you think you're going, go a little bit slower. It's not about how fast can we implement technology. You can implement technology super fast. It's about how fast humans can adopt and adapt to the changing technology that you need to focus on. And to that point, when you think about your change management plan, when you think about your communication and learning development, and you put that into your project plan, don't put it into your project plan as a waterfall item, right? On this date, we will give training on this item, and then they will be trained, and we'll move on to something else. And we've got it all magically mapped out to know exactly what it is, because you don't know what your people's needs are going to be until you're deep in the throes of doing it. Remember the case study I shared with you about the winemaker a little while back? One of the things they did with that was they scheduled resources like this in a very flexible manner, saying, we think we'll need this many training materials and this many little videos, and we're going to have a learning site and portal for people and all those kinds of things that we can put them on. And then they started doing some stuff with it. And as they got into it, they started realizing, hey, we really wanted to drive people to use the Viva Engage stories and storylines, their own place to share things instead of communities. And they found that people were not adopting that very well. And it was actually hurting the architecture. Long term, it was going to become hard to sustain, and people weren't going to have the voice they really wanted them to have by adopting that. So they flexibly said, let's take those resources we already had planned and let's focus them on driving adoption for the right behaviors, doing the right things. Even though we thought we trained them on that, apparently that didn't happen. So your adoption plan, your learning and development plan, it needs to be super, super, super flexible, and it never goes away, right? It's not structured learning. It's monitoring your people and making sure you know what they're aware of. The magical trifecta for all this too is you've already got great tools available to you in Microsoft 365. Make sure you set up a learning portal so you can set up a SharePoint site dedicated just to learning content. You might have more than one out there, but let's at least say when it comes to Microsoft 365 adoption and even the governance around that, have a portal where all of those learnings are there. Combine that with a support community, a self-support community. Viva Engage is an excellent solution for something like that. So if people want to raise a question and support each other and answer each other's questions, create that little self-support community where they can have those conversations. And the cool thing about Viva Engage with questions and answers is as things get answered, it becomes its own kind of self-documenting help desk for people to go to get help when they need it. And Viva Learning, that's included in your Microsoft 365 license, not the full premium version of Viva Learning, but just a basic one, which for many organizations is sufficient. And if you think, well, we've already got an LMS, we don't want to do all of that stuff, I can tell you most of the clients we work with, when they have an LMS, it is meant for big compliance type learning engagement where they can track what people are doing, and it takes a lot of time and effort to load things into it, and it takes a lot of time and effort to access it and get information out of it. This trifecta is great for those little just-in-time learning bites, because you don't want people to go, well, I need to do something in SharePoint. I guess I'll sign up for that 1 hour video that we've got internally so I can learn how to do that. They need to know I need to add a new column over here. I just need like the minute and a half video or 1-page SharePoint document telling me how to do that one thing that I need to do. That's what this setup is optimized to do. And one goal we always like to see people establish as they think about their roadmap and their overall plan for support is think about developing training content over time that onboards, yes, your existing people, but also new people, right? So it gives you kind of a nice way to kind of go, instead of going, okay, we got this and this and all these random things, you think when someone comes in, how do they step through learning all the things that we do? And you gradually start building out your library that way. That's important for 2 reasons. Number one, it results in a nice comprehensive digital learning library for you. Number 2, your new people are actually much easier for you to influence to change their behavior than the people who've been working with you for 20 years, right? So yes, you want to give everyone an opportunity to learn and grow, but those new people in particular, they're going to be the ones that have more of an impact on actually changing your culture, people starting to see them doing things new ways, and the rest of the organization is influenced by them and adopts. Okay, 2 habits left. So this is another very wordy one. I wish I could think of a simpler way to say it. I used to say necessary complexity, and you'll see what I mean when I get into this in the next slide. But this idea that whatever you do with your digital workplace, with your modern collaboration hub, it needs to check these boxes, right? So it's easy to kind of turn it on and say, well, the president wanted to have a place where they could communicate executive information to people, so we put that in there. But you know what? If everyone in the organization says there's never anything there I care about, it's not useful for me, it doesn't ever talk about me, it's irrelevant, it's a waste of my time, they're not going to go to do it, right? And there's so much richness available in SharePoint and Teams now to add things that help people get their work done, whether it's work, executing a project, or whether it's related to work. Hey, I need to understand how to file for time off, and I'd like that form embedded directly in SharePoint so I don't have to go somewhere else to do it. If all that's in there, they have one place to go, one-stop shopping to get everything done. People are going to use it more. So I call it necessary complexity because a lot of organizations say, look, we just want to turn this on and use it out of the box. And by the way, we have something from our HR outsource provider that does some of this, and we bought something else for an onboarding app that does this, and we've got an LMS app that does that. You might actually have apps that if you look at them all, maybe they do things really, really well, but you're killing your people because they got to go figure out how to get access to all those different things to do things, and they just give up, right? It's like, well, if I don't have to do it, I'm not going to do it. But if I can put more and more things in one place that I can get my job done with, I'm going to actually be a more productive employee. It adds a little complexity to your SharePoint project, but it adds a lot of simplicity to the life of your team, and that's what you're actually after. So some practical examples of this, I'm going to go kind of build this all at once. six, right? Yeah, 6 examples of this. All of these, except for one, actually have a clickable link. So if you want to watch little videos of how this can work, here's some things we've done out of a very, very long list, but some of the simple, approachable ones that we see happen a lot of times where you can drive these things, right? It's relevant, it's useful. So first of all, recognizing your employees, right? So that you can easily in SharePoint and Teams and over Microsoft 365 recognize people for it's your birthday, right? Happy birthday. And you don't have to put the year there. You don't have to disclose private information. You can even make this optional for the user. Hey, I don't want people to know when my birthday is. That's up to the user to make that decision. Workplace anniversaries you can also have here. Oh my gosh, you've been here for 5 years. It's gone by so quick, right? And when you do this correctly, you're putting it into a social feed. So people not only see that, oh, hey, look, people know it's my birthday, but people are starting to comment on that in there too, right? People start to know I am seen. I am a part of this team, right? This is something bigger than just me coming in and doing my work. And also more detailed employee profiles. The bigger you are, the more important it is for people to be able to find the people they need to find to help them get the work done that they need to get done. Microsoft 365 gives you some great options for that. Requires a little tweaking and customization, but it's pretty easily attainable. Recruiting and onboarding is another area we see a lot of gaps for organizations. And a lot of organizations get hung up on, we're going to go buy an HR application that does recruiting and onboarding for us well and manages that better. And there's a time and place for that. But what I can say is those applications usually have an enormous learning curve, lots of licensing fees associated with them, and some not overly complicated things you can do with Microsoft Lists and Power Automate flows can take you leaps and bounds forward over not having anything at all. You want to get a little more sophisticated with it. Putting something together with a Dataverse type of app can really, really accelerate that significantly. And Microsoft's actually making investments into those things to make them even better tools for doing that. Document management, SharePoint and Teams and OneDrive, they're awesome document management tools. But what you may not know is, especially with some of the emerging capabilities, scanning and automation of documents is now way more powerful than it ever used to be. So in that little video, if you watch it, you can actually see you can go from, I get a document, I have to open it, I have to key everything in again, I have to manually email it to someone to get it approved, to I scan it, or better yet, I just have an email address monitoring it. It automatically scans the document, grabs relevant information off of that document, sticks that information into a database for me, triggers an approval workflow automatically. One click, it automatically gets inserted into my accounting database or customer database or document file, whatever it is. And I've taken a 15+ minute job and turned it into a few seconds to click a few buttons, where AI and optical character recognition are doing most of the rest of the work for me. Capital expenditure approval project we did for a client. So just this idea of, hey, we've got things like people need to buy automobiles and things like that because we have this big field service group, and we need to make that easy, but we also need to put that in a database and manage it a lot more tightly because we want to do fleet management. Well, you can do all of that. That was a Dataverse for Teams application that allows them to do that, and it's fully integrated with Microsoft Teams. Managing your project management office. Microsoft has incredible tools for that. Just like SharePoint, it's not throw the switch and start using it. It's, well, what is our plan for it? What's our architecture? How will we use this for what we do if you want to get maximum usage out of it? But that's amazing. Standard operating procedure library. That's the session that I did last week. So that's a short little video. If you want to watch the longer version of that, that'll be on YouTube soon for you to be able to take a look at, hey, how might we be able to put a library together of all of our standard operating procedures in SharePoint so it's easy for everybody to access those in one place. That's just a tiny list, right? The list goes on and on, but these are all things where people start to go, oh, I have to use this to get my job done. It helps me actually be more productive, more effective within our organization. Is it easy? Not always. Well, look, your business is a complex place, right? If it weren't complex, you wouldn't have these technology investments you were making to do it. And I can also tell you that making things simple is complex, right? I don't mean it's complex for the end user. I mean, it takes a little more lifting on the back end to say, let's take these apps that we saw on that last screen and let's make it really easy for our users to get these things done. If you want to do that, that's a little more time customizing and configuring to give a great experience to the end user. So complexity, yes. Complexity to the end user, no. You want a simple experience for them. And our last one, you can call this support, you can call this maintenance, you can call it whatever you want. I call it care and feeding because it's another one of those. If I say support or maintenance, I don't think it quite fits the full description of what you're looking for. So here's what I mean by this. Once your digital workplace is up and running, the day you throw the switch and say, checkered flag, we got to the end of the project, that's the day everything starts to fall apart. Right? That's just how it is. Look, you buy a new house and you move in. You unlock the door, you go in the door. That's the day the foundation starts to erode. That's the day that things start to need maintenance over time, right? The exact same thing is true of your digital workplace environment. But the way we typically work in our digital workplaces is we wait until the door falls off the hinges before we decide we have a problem, right? We wait until, oh my gosh, we lost a bunch of data. Maybe we should have thought about backups a little bit differently. Wow, we've got this huge mess going on here. No one can find anything they need. We got to do a spring cleaning project to clean that up. Well, it'd probably save time, money, frustration, and improve adoption if you had governance policies in place so a mess didn't happen to begin with. That's what a maintenance plan looks like, right? So it's this paced out way of, just like you maintain your home, just like you pay if you have a physical workplace, someone to do maintenance for you. There are certain things that need to happen on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly, quarterly, biannual, and annual basis. This is a little quick list of those, but when you think about a more comprehensive plan, this is kind of the checklist of things that you probably want to think about. Now, not all of these things are necessarily required for every organization and in every case, but this is a good starting point for you to look at and kind of go, what of these things do we need to make sure happens so that people get the support they need, so that we're executing little projects and constantly improving, so that things are governed well and that we're monitoring that, so when people color outside the lines, we can kind of get them back inside the lines. How can we make sure that everything remains safe, secure, functioning smoothly, so that you as a technology person, you as a business person, are unleashed to contribute strategically to the organization instead of having to focus on the minutia of, I got to look at this Power Automate report to make sure that nothing is failing, right? So a maintenance plan does all that for you. Ideally, you work with a partner like us who can do some of this for you. Maybe you own some of it, maybe your partner does. Whether you work with your partner or not, you need a maintenance plan. These are the kind of things you need to consider on that maintenance plan. Okay. So wrapping up, we've talked about 7 habits. I want to close with a couple of thoughts about the 7 habits. First of all, the word habit was used very intentionally here. If you go back and look at every single one of these aren't a, I did it, check. These are they're kind of all part of that very last one. These are we need to do this again and again. We need to have a process that makes sure that these things happen on a periodic basis at the right cadence to keep everything running the way we need it to keep running. Look at diving deeper. I've given you a ton of links. If you've not gotten them from us yet, hit me up. I'll get you the PDF. Dive deeper into these, particularly if you think, wow, we might be kind of weak in that one. Dive deep in those areas and make sure you get the assets so you can look at those and say, how can we do better information architecture? What might that look like? Get the follow-up assets on that. And remember from what Harvard Business Review said, a digital coach is really, really important. That's what the 19% who are doing this well, all of them have a digital coach and they've created a digital vision. That's a differentiator. Yes, we at C5 provide those services. Whether you avail yourself of those with us or someone else, that's up to you. But if you're looking for a partner to help you with, that's what we're here to help you with. So remember, at the end of all this, habits, it's a plan, right? Just like your physical workplace needs a maintenance plan, your digital workplace needs a maintenance plan too. Think about these 7 habits and how you will adopt every one of these to help you work better and get the most out of your modern digital workplace. I promised you a few things at the end of this. Here they are. Resources. If you want the slide deck with the links, just hit me up. There's my email address right on the page. Send me an email. I'll get those to you right away. I mentioned the idea of luck. We've got a couple of books on Amazon. If you like the idea of that and you want to dig deeper into it, you can search for The Luck Principle by myself. If you're more on the business development side, you might want to search for the book Revenue Engineering by my colleague Tricia Desso-Cox. 2 great books on thinking about people first within your organization. Of course, as I said before, this is what we do. We run our business to help you be more successful with your projects like this. We'd love for you to consider us and reach out to us if there's anything we can do for you. And one timely announcement is there is an event coming up in May of this year that we're running called 365 Leadership Summit. You can get to that with a link, gotluck.link/lead365, and you can read all about it. It's actually part of something bigger called Dynamics Con Live. It's in Denver in the month of May. So gotluck.link/lead365. You can go there. There's even a discount code to register for that. If you like this kind of content, we're going to have a day and a half of content just for Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, Power Platform leaders, right? The people who need to be the project managers, the project sponsors, the C-level executives, the business analysts who get the most out of these tools that you might use within your workplace. So make sure you sign up for that. And if you hit me up, I'll give you a discount link that's a much better discount that you can find on our website. So hit me up via email. I'll be sure to get to that. I'll be sure to get that for you. Thanks everybody so much for coming today. I'm monitoring Q&A. I don't see anything in there right now, so we're going to call it a wrap. But my contact information is there. If you need to reach out, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks again for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.